Hello, hello, hello. We are super, super excited to have our first Faith and OCD Roundtable. This is going to be a new series that we are super enthusiastic about having every other month to have conversations about all things faith and OCD. And this is really our kickoff tonight. We have some awesome folks on here. We're going to give a second for folks who are watching live to come in, to sit down, to grab a snack, to think about all of the awesome questions that you want to ask. So feel free as we get started to add to the chat where you're watching from. Feel free to say hi. And as we get started, feel free to go ahead and start loading up questions in the chat if you have questions about particular things. And we're going to try to get to as many as possible tonight. I see Carol. Hi, Carol. And hi to other folks as you start coming in. And so glad that you're watching from New York. So I know we'll have folks from all over, and we're glad to have everybody here. Yes, and we have Australia as well. So awesome. Love it. I'm trying to think, what time would it be in Australia? North Carolina? What time is it in Australia? Hi from Toronto.
Australia, okay, so it's probably about 11 o'clock a.m. right now, but it depends on where you are in Australia. So 10, 11, 12.
Okay, so because I always forget because it's like tomorrow. You can tell us what's going on tomorrow. Is it going to be a good day? What's it going to look like? I love that.
Tell us, please.
Which, for the record, I have an uncle that lives in Australia, and Dad was like, Uncle Joe just called. The world didn't end at 2000. You know, and it's like, it's like the world's still running in Australia, and it's like, way to ruin the surprise, Dad.
Mm-hmm. You know, we're all trying to sit with the uncertainty here about what's going to happen. Right?
Mm-hmm. I'm waiting for planes to start dropping out of the sky.
Does that mean that you couldn't wait until the actual midnight strike? You couldn't tolerate the uncertainty, Dr. Woods?
No, I could. I was mad that he ruined the surprise.
Fair enough.
Okay, and I see. So it's 11 a.m. where you are. Okay, so I see that in the chat. Yep, I see Ethan is here, one of our national advocates. We have Peter from Texas, Miles from Toronto. So we have a great crew here tonight. So we'll go ahead and jump in and just want to welcome everyone to our first Faith and OCD Roundtable live stream. Again, as I said, this is going to be happening every other month with the goal of discussing ways to navigate OCD in all of its forms in faith communities, with a special focus on religious scrupulosity. We want everyone to know that faith and mental health do not have to be mutually exclusive, and that you can engage in exposure and response prevention while also engaging in your faith tradition in value-driven ways. So just as a quick disclaimer before we dive in tonight to our content, that this live stream is intended to serve as educational content and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you're in distress or feel unsafe. If you're in a crisis or if you're ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255. We also want to create as safe a space as possible tonight, so we encourage you to be kind and respectful of everyone in the chat. With that, this is being broadcast on various social media platforms and is being recorded. So please be mindful of that as you ask personal questions or as you leave comments. But at the end of the day, we are just all here to support one another. This is a community, and we are so incredibly glad that you're here for this important topic, for this important conversation, and hope that you'll continue to join us. So some quick introductions before we dive into our content tonight. I'm excited to be hosting this new series. I'm Reverend Katie O'Dunn. I like to say, I always put Reverend on here just because I like folks to know that ordained ministers do have OCD, but I'm also really informal. So Katie is perfectly fine and what I go by. I'm an ordained minister and interfaith chaplain, and I have OCD. I became an IOCDF lead advocate following a relapse when I decided I no longer wanted to keep my story a secret after so many years of having a lot of shame around having OCD and being a faith leader and not wanting anyone to know. So started getting to have these conversations in religious spaces. And I'm now proud to be the founder of Faith and Mental Health Integrative Services, helping individuals with OCD and related disorders live into their faith tradition and navigate evidence-based treatment. But more than anything, I love leading our amazing faith and mental health work with the IOCDF, including our monthly special interest group where all are welcome that we'll share about a little bit later. Tonight, I'm excited to be joined by Justin Hughes, who is the owner of Dallas Counseling. He's a clinician, a writer. He's passionate about helping those impacted by OCD, and his treatment approach utilizes CBT with ERP and techniques from other approaches like ACT, MI, and CT. A common contributor to the field of OCD treatment through writings, live streams, and conferences, and more, he serves on the IOCDF Faith Task Force, woo woo, and is the Dallas ambassador for OCD Texas. Working with a diversity of clients, he is also a dual trained in psychology and theology, regularly helping anyone to understand the interaction between faith and OCD, most commonly Christians. And I'm sure folks follow him on social media as well, where he has all sorts of exciting things that we can kind of keep up to date with around faith and OCD. Then we have Dr. Claggett Woods, who is a clinical psychologist who currently provides comprehensive assessment and individualized treatment for adults through the teletherapy platform NoCD, with a particular focus on the treatment of OCD and anxiety-related disorders. She's an adjunct professor of clinical psychology with the University of Ottawa and director of Changing Minds, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to addressing barriers to accessing evidence-based mental health care in the Ottawa, Ontario area. Dr. Claggett Woods is a proud member of the IOCDF's Faith-Based Task Force, also woo-woo, dedicated to bringing awareness and education to the religious community about OCD and increasing access to evidence-based care. So we have two awesome clinicians here tonight. Then we have two folks with lived experience. We have Valerie Andrews, who is a retired school teacher and full-time wife, mother, and grandmother. Following her OCD diagnosis in 2011, she began advocating in hopes of bringing awareness and inclusion within her own community and communities of faith. Today, she spends the majority of her time focusing on her nonprofit, Miss Mabel's Sparrows Incorporated, a nonprofit for women of age, color, and faith. And her goal is to continue working as an IOCDF lead advocate and promoting change. So she leads a lot of the awesome work that we do as well. And then finally, we have Alex Rosenberg, who is a 12th grade student in Rockville, Maryland. He was diagnosed with OCD when he was 10 years old. He improved a great deal with medication and therapy and tries to reach out to others with OCD who may need extra support. And if you have been on any of our faith and OCD programming in the past, you have heard how incredibly knowledgeable Alex is on both Judaism and the manifestations of religious scrupulosity in the Jewish faith. So I know he'll bring a lot of insight to our conversation tonight. So I've seen... Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, and like similar to Katie, my preferred moniker is Lord and Commander, but otherwise Caitlin is fine.
This could be problematic with scrupulosity.
Maybe. Who knows?
Well, you know, Commander, if it makes you uncomfortable.
I'll make sure to go with Commander. That's
yes, brilliant. Actually, I'm not allowed to reference that, I think, because of copyright issues. All right, I will not reference it.
You'll not reference the thing that maybe you've heard Lord and Commander from before?
Sure.
Yeah, we're copyright issue free here with our IOCDF live stream, so that's what we strive for. So it looks like everyone, we have a lot of folks who are kind of starting to jump on. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our discussion. But for folks who are listening, if you have any questions either about what we're chatting about or just something else that comes up for you around faith, OCD, scrupulosity, or really OCD in any form, feel free to add that to the chat. And we're going to try to answer your questions as we move through to make sure that this is meaningful for you, because that's really what this is all about, making sure that we're offering help to folks who are watching and who are on this journey, because we're on the journey together. So my first question tonight, I would love to just start by asking Justin, what is religious scrupulosity? If you had to just define, what does that mean? What does that look like? What's religious scrup?
Yeah, thanks. And first of all, Katie, just always such an honor to be here with you. And then as I come here tonight, as I spend time on the OCD Faith Task Force, and Alex, see you just killing it on the live streams and with Dr. Abramowitz and so forth. Like how cool it is to be here. This is a great group of folks. I'm just super pumped to be here. So scrupulosity. Okay. First of all, we're going to have to understand OCD, because what we mean when we say scrupulosity is inherently tied to the clinical definition of OCD. And I'll talk for a quick second in a moment about the non-clinical definition, which can sometimes differ. So OCD, most people will know this, but first of all, obsessions, intrusive, unwanted thoughts, urges, images, impulses, kind of almost anything. It's intrusive, presses in, and then secondarily, compulsions. These are ritualistic, scripted, expectable responses, or sometimes unexpected, that are behaviors or thought processes to neutralize the distress or to manage or create relief, but it's in response specifically to having that intrusion. And then to be a disorder, as with anything mental health, it has to cause a certain amount of impairments as well. So when we talk about scrupulosity, there's a few terms that we can use, like religiosity as well. It's kind of interchangeable. But basically, we're talking about either faith matters, spiritual, religious, faith tradition concerns, anything. It's fairly broad. And so the obsession can be about, did I do this enough? Did I say this prayer enough? Does it feel right? Did I do this well enough? Will I dishonor God? And we'll probably get into this tonight, but yes, even atheists and agnostics can have scrupulosity as well. So this is what we're talking about in a general sense. Anybody else can jump in here in a second to fill that out. But when we're talking about OCD, it really comes back to the heart of what OCD is. Now, quick comments about general scrupulosity. It's a term that's been used for a long time. I mean, years and years prior, hundreds of years ago. It really comes from the Latin word scruples, which at first kind of meant like a pebble in the shoe that was annoying. And it later took on other definitions. And so others will claim a very specific definition. I'm not saying that that's necessarily wrong, but it's maybe used in different ways in different contexts. By and large, with OCD, we're talking about OCD and a theme that pertains to religious, spiritual, or faith type issues.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Justin. And thank you for putting that back and really explaining how that fits in with OCD as well, because I think a lot of times folks hear the word religious scrupulosity and they don't necessarily recognize, oh, wait, this is a manifestation of OCD. And I see this a lot with even clergy who they might have heard the word religious scrupulosity, but then I say OCD and they'll say, wait, so what's that? How does that connect? And it's like, well, it's a kind of an essential component here, this connection that we're making. So Caitlin, I know that you treat in this area as well and are really passionate about this. Do you have anything that you'd like to add about kind of how you define religious scrupulosity maybe for your clients?
I mean, I think I would say much of the same things that Justin would say, like as he just did, but just to kind of the experience of scrupulosity, right? Like, as we know, OCD is all about not knowing, right? The uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen. And is there anything more unknown than the afterlife, right? How things are going to turn out once you have died, because there is no way to know what's actually going to happen. So it would make a lot of sense that OCD would latch on to this area, because there is no certainty whatsoever. We have faith, we have kind of hopes, but we have no idea or no way of actually knowing. So just to kind of, I guess, put what Justin's talking about in the context of the lived experience there, right? Again, it makes a lot of sense why OCD would attack someone's religious beliefs, even if they were agnostic or atheist, because again, we don't actually know, right? None of us knows if we are correct in our kind of understanding about what happens after we die. And that can be pretty horrifying, pretty difficult to live with in terms of something not to know.
Yeah, Caitlin, I love that you brought up that uncertainty around faith, because talking with folks all the time with religious scrupulosity, the question I keep getting is, well, everybody else is totally certain. And well, how can I be certain that mine is correct? And how can I be certain that mine is right? We end up having this conversation often that faith isn't about certainty, whether you have OCD or you don't have OCD. It's about moving towards something that you believe and that's significant to you. But for those with OCD, that's really tough. And both what Caitlin and Justin were noting is that this can look a lot of different ways in a lot of different faith traditions. And for those even maybe with no faith tradition wondering, well, does this mean that I'm doing something wrong? Should I be engaging in this way? And so we're going to talk a little bit tonight about how this is lived out. Yeah, go ahead, Caitlin.
No, to that point, right? Where if people are saying it's like, but everybody else around me is so certain. It's like everybody else around you is about as certain as about the afterlife as they are that they're not going to get into a car accident on their way to the grocery store, right? It's something that they take for granted, something that they don't necessarily dwell on or think about, but they don't actually have the certainty that that's not going to happen, right? So just because somebody does not express doubt in this area does not mean that they have certainty.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you said that again. And I feel like I'm a broken record in saying that to folks. And it's so incredibly important. So Alex, I'd love to hear, how is this lived out for you? What is kind of your intersection of OCD and faith and like just a little bit in your journey?
Yeah. So my kind of spiel is that I come from a family that has been less observant in Judaism, and I've actually become more observant, partially because of an experience I had with this amazing rabbi at my school, and with the incredible communities that I've had. I go to a Jewish secular private school with different opinions. It's pluralistic, but basically, becoming more religious was an interesting thing because, first of all, my family is wondering, well, is this OCD? And I'm wondering that as well. Am I just becoming more observant because of my OCD, or is this actually my identity? And that's something that I've really focused on. Now, the answer is really, it was because of my identity. It is because of my identity, and it's a fundamental part of my identity. But even today, I still struggle with some things where I'm asking myself, is this a compulsion from my OCD, or is this my identity talking? And that can be a very difficult distinction to make. And so today, as I'm going, actually, an interesting story is very recently I've had, some questions about, well, how much do I actually believe in my faith? And something that I'm really thinking to myself is, well, you know what, with OCD, it makes it so that I sometimes feel like I don't believe in these things, but that's just because my body wants me to have like a perfect answer as to whether or not there's a God. And realistically, I have a little bit of a challenge that maybe some other people don't have in certain ways. But my experience has really been that whatever this challenge, it's completely possible to manage it. And it is very possible to have an open line of communication between my faith leader and my therapist. And in fact, we have had a lot of open-minded discussion among all of us, and it's been very rewarding. And I've had an incredible experience with just incredible support. So for any people out there wondering whether or not it's possible, the answer is yes, it is very possible.
Alex is such a great example of that relationship that really can take place. And I think this comes up often because sometimes in faith communities, and I just want to note for anyone watching that has had this experience, I know sometimes there are some negative experiences in faith communities around mental health where unfortunately sometimes there are faith leaders that I believe are truly well-meaning, which is why they're in that role, but might say or do things that are harmful or misinformed around mental health. And Alex is a really great example of getting to work with a rabbi who really wanted to learn and to engage. And one of the things we're really trying to work on with the IOCDF is putting out resources so that you can share things with your faith leaders so that they can be a part of that conversation, so that you can continue to engage in your faith in a way that's meaningful, but also seek treatment. And sometimes there's just kind of a lack of information there that we can really offer so that there can be this really positive dialogue across those boundaries.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side as well, it's very important to recognize the importance of telling the therapist about the certain customs and traditions you have on the religious side, and that kind of two-way communication.
Yeah, it's so incredibly important. And I think and there's a lot of therapists too who are really working to try to understand what do different faith traditions look like so that they can adequately offer exposures and things like that. That education, I agree, it's just as important on both sides. Val, you're such a great example of course, one of our lead advocates leading a lot of the faith and OCD work, but really of someone who tries to do this work in the pews themselves, and you do such a great job with that. So what does that look like for you? How have you kind of tried to bridge the gap in your own journey between faith and your OCD?
Well, it's been challenging because I've been on this walk a good while, and I think it was really challenging before I was diagnosed with knowing I had OCD, because you get all of those other thoughts. Am I good enough? Am I not trusting God? Am I a hypocrite for sitting here in the pews and having all these things going on in my head? For me, once I was diagnosed and took it upon myself to really start learning and trying to pass information within my own church body, it made a huge difference, because in the beginning, so often I think, excuse me, so often I think as sufferers in the pews, we just sit there in silence and shame, and we don't know how to bring that conversation out. And I think for myself, I was one of those people in the beginning, and it was only because I didn't know what was going on. But once I started talking about having OCD and mental illness and asking for prayer and bringing it up, every time I could at my Wednesday night Bible study, or when we had a prayer request, it was like, hey, can you pray for, people with OCD? And they started getting it in a sense. And I started feeling that some of that stigma and taboo was starting to smooth out. Now, this was just in my own personal church body, but I found when I went outside of that bubble, it was, downright crickets. Nobody talked about it. If they did, it was more of a conviction. You too blessed to be stressed. I hate that saying. I always turn it around and say I'm blessed despite my stress. But it was a learning experience, and I think it continues to be that. But with especially young people, I'm so impressed with all these young people on the panel that they're kind of leading the way. I can see the doors are starting to open up a little bit, but there's still much work to do, especially within communities of color.
Yeah, thank you, Val, for bringing that up within communities of color and within so many, really so many faith traditions. I think often we think about the Abrahamic traditions, and we think about Christianity, and we think about Judaism, and sometimes we think about Islam. But one of the things we really want to do with this new series is give attention to Hinduism and to Sikhism and Jainism and so many traditions that I'm sure value as an advocate too, that so many of us hear from folks on a weekly basis of, okay, I don't know what to do in my community, and I don't know how to talk to my faith leader about this. And it's really, really important. So Val, I think you're inspiring so many women of color and of age and of faith to really tell their stories, and it's pretty awesome, because you're really helping open those doors. So thank you for that.
Thank you. It's by necessity. I was encouraged when for so many years I thought that there was no work being done, but now, especially working with this foundation, they're so great. I can see and be encouraged by that we're getting there, but it's, the process is a little slow. Always just ask God, let me see that stigma end within my lifetime. But yeah.
So that stigma piece becomes really important. And part of, I think, breaking down the stigma, and we're going to talk about this in a lot of aspects of the series, but it is also folks knowing within this community, what does treatment actually look like, and being able to to share that so that individuals are able to get help. So I'd love to go back to Caitlin and Justin, and y'all can both chime in on this. Just in terms of chatting about what does the treatment look like for OCD and maybe more specifically religious scrupulosity, which folks might find are actually intertwined once again. But what does that mean, and what does that look like?
So our gold standard treatment for OCD, exposure and response prevention, right? So exposure, coming into contact with things that you are afraid of, that cause uncertainty, the things that bring you distress, and the response prevention aspect of not doing anything to try to make that distress go away, not doing anything to try to make those thoughts go away. So kind of a very basic example of this might be looking at a picture of a tarantula without closing your eyes or turning away or like tensing up your body, right? It is coming into contact with the thing that you are afraid of, with the thing that you feel uncertain about, and letting all of those thoughts and emotions be there, becoming an observer of those, not doing anything to try to escape the situation. As I like to tell my folks, very straightforward. Doesn't mean that it's easy in any capacity, right? Like I tell them, it's like, yeah, bench pressing 200 pounds is very straightforward. Does that mean that it's easy?
Well, for some of us. I mean, look at me.
Well, I'm going to take tips from you after this, Justin.
And also, if I may say, that sometimes it's easier than you would expect, and oftentimes way easier than suffering with OCD. Oh, I'll be quiet. Please continue.
Absolutely. No, I was just going to say, kind of bringing it into the faith-based realm, right? The scrupulosity realm, the exposures that we're looking at are the things that you are currently avoiding, that currently bring you a lot of distress within the faith community, right? So for some people, that might be even going to a church service, right? For other people, that might be saying their prayers imperfectly, right? We have all kinds of ideas for what exposures might be, and it's particularly important that we target them to the individual, right? We're not just like have this arbitrary list of exposures that you do, but we target them to the individual and the kind of the things that would help them specifically move forward.
Yeah, and that's that religiously sensitive side of things that when done well, and it actually really can be done well, can actually be done in a way where the heart of exposure is done and a person is honored and respected as far as their beliefs.
Yeah. And this is a part that I've been sitting on that I couldn't wait to mention is the extreme importance of collaboration, right? The relationship, the treatment does not need to only include the clinician and the client, right? Rather, it is not only kind of helpful, it is kind of ethical to include the conversation with the other people that are involved, including a faith leader that you respect, right? Because I, as a clinician, am not necessarily going to share the faith background of any client with scrupulosity that comes into my office. I have the skills to provide them with evidence-based care, but I need guidance on what respectful treatment of their scrupulosity looks like within their tradition. Unfortunately, I have heard stories within the Catholic realm of some clinicians saying it's like, no, you have to use a Ouija board. If you don't use a Ouija board, you're not going to get better. And Ouija boards are, Catholics say no to that, right? That is within the Catholic tradition to not use Ouija boards, to avoid Ouija boards, right? And so, yes, okay, it's likely important that you can look at it, right? Because if you are walking through a toy store and you see a Ouija board, you need to be able to continue shopping at the toy store.
Sell those at toy stores?
Oh yeah, Toys R Us.
Yeah. And there's a new commercial out that actually, if it didn't play on the Super Bowl, it was recent, but they actually use a Ouija board in the commercial. And
right,
it's
yeah.
a great example of a real life trigger that you could just be walking in the store and a TV could be playing, right? With yes.
Yeah. It's important to be able to do the things that you need to do to live your life and to, do the things that the typical person every day can do. However, this does not in any way, shape, or form mean going against your religious beliefs and traditions.
Yep. And I think as clinicians, one of the things to say across the board, exposure is pretty cool and the results can be quite amazing. I am a huge fanboy of exposure. And it's really fun to talk about the big, awesome stuff that clients do. And that's super exciting. However, sometimes we need a little bit of wisdom when we're speaking as clinicians, especially to a broader community. For example, one well-known exposure clinician had spoken of the hardcore level 10 social exposure they do in their social phobia, but broadcast as this is an expectation for social phobia treatment in an educational writing that they had put out. And all right, that's cool. If you're fully bought in, you understand what you're doing. But for the general person to hear that right off of the bat, the example specifically is to go up and ask somebody out on a date right away, just blind. And for a person who has social phobia, for example, to walk into a situation and do that, they'd be like, nope, I'm out of treatment. And so I think a lot of us clinicians have kind of failed in the nuance and the wisdom of being able to say, hey, we're going to slow this down. We're going to talk it through, involve your faith leader, clergy, etc. If that's helpful, and really look at this in a way to say, the whole point of the clinical side of why we're here is the disorder side, which implies that there is an order that we're trying to get back. Help me understand. What does that look like? Let's figure this out together and do it in a way that's doable and sustainable for you.
Mm-hmm. And just kind of further to that, right, there is a current barrier is not only do clinicians, either it doesn't occur to them or for whatever reason, like don't end up communicating with the faith leader, but from the other side, there can be mistrust as well, right? From the faith leader in terms of trusting and recommending have a conversation with a clinician, because for the record, bad experiences have happened.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I'm so glad. I'm so glad that y'all are speaking to this. And just to note, hello to everyone who jumped on the chat. We had a lot of people. We had Eric and Alex and Kim and Lavlana and so many, and Thomas. And we're going to get to, I saw a couple questions pop up, which we will get to, but I love what Caitlin and Justin are saying. And it's been, for folks who know my story, I'm leaving my job to shift into kind of this full time and working with clinicians kind of from the interfaith and faith leader perspective to figure out, okay, what does someone's faith tradition actually look like from the religious perspective? How can we respect this and also help them with exposures? How can we separate faith from OCD? But how do we have these conversations with faith leaders? And Caitlin, you're so right, because that conversation becomes really important, and yet it isn't always done in healthy ways, where there are faith leaders who are offering reassurance or who are doing things that aren't necessarily helpful as a part of this process. And I think that collaboration is essential. And just for folks on here to hear that one of kind of the long-term goals of some of what we're doing is to offer more comprehensive training for faith leaders. I would like to eventually have some kind of certification program so that faith leaders can be certified to do some of this work alongside clinicians and understand OCD. So all of those things are possible with some of the work we're doing. I saw Val, I think you were trying to jump in. Let me shift it to Val before we shift questions.
No, I was just going to tag on that. It's so important, like you say, that it's individual, and also that we recognize the diversity in even being a Christian. There's Christian, and there's, the Black Christian, the Black church, and even within the Black church, you have different subtypes. There's Church of God in Christ, there's African American Methodist, there's Pentecostal. So all of those things kind of factor in. And I know for me, one of my goals is to, I think one of the big issues we have as a faith community and a OCD community, we have this us versus them thing, and it's because we're trying to do work without each other, and it is so much helpful, and it makes your job so much easier, or I should say your living or your suffering so much easier when you feel you have support from both sides. I went through the thing, especially coming from a Black church, that I was finding that a lot of people, and not necessarily Christians or people of faith, but they have an issue with white theologists. You know, it's like they can't relate because they're not living in their world, and there's such a difference in, like I said, all of these faith communities that we just draw that line in the sand and say, you know, I'm a tune out. I'm on this side of I'm on this side of the line, you know, or I'm on this side of the line. And it's like, I don't understand why there's such a fear, I find, in church to even hear the word mental. And then in the other, on the other spectrum, you know, we get to the point where we're afraid to talk about religion, you know, because there's so many difference. So I think that's where a lot of the work is going to have to begin, like you say, bringing that, bridging that us versus them, because neither one is going anywhere. You know, our pastors aren't going anywhere, our therapists aren't going anywhere, and how are we helping each other by being afraid.
Valerie, one of the things that I was thinking of, and ties in, Alex, to your sharing as well, is y'all's courage in actually talking about these things. And obviously we want it to occur so that those that may not necessarily have y'all's boldness can still get help and access to services. But it's a huge deal, like bringing that up with your Bible study, being so vulnerable. Alex, for you to actually speak forthrightly and be assertive even in your treatment process, I think that that's huge. And that was just one of the big pieces that I heard from both of y'all sharing that really was a game changer, just really speaking up.
Yes, and I'm so proud that he's done it at such an early age.
Oh my goodness.
We were talking about ERP earlier, and I was sitting here thinking it took me 54 years to get diagnosed with OCD, but it took me 51 days of doing ERP to get me living and to enjoy in life. And I just think I get so excited when I see young people, you know, trying to change all those thoughts and all those traditions and all of that junk that all of us bring sometimes to the table of faith and to the communities of OCD. So thank you, Justin.
Yeah. Well, and you understand,
I don't think I could have done it at Alex's age. I think a lot of it for me had to do with being older and feeling that as you get older, you know, I kind of took on that I don't care attitude.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
because
I mean,
like I said, I can see my, you know, I'm no longer going up the hill. I'm going down the hill. So whatever.
You're always going up the hill. We're always, well, but I think that's great.
That I wanted to add though was,
I was going to say that's a great transition to Alex. Go ahead, Alex. I'd love to hear about what your thoughts are.
Something I wanted to add is I think this advocacy for between people, I think has first of all been, you know, I'm something I'm very fortunate to have, but also is definitely something that is possible and as well very helpful to do among everyone who's struggling. I know it can be very difficult to bring these things up, but I do want to stress just how incredibly rewarding it is to be forthright and communicative among all people. I had concerns that maybe my therapist was not going to be as understanding about it, even though my therapist is actually also Jewish, but I'm more on the Orthodox spectrum than he is. And so I was, even among Judaism, there's a little bit of a difference of opinion, but he was so amazing. And also I was concerned maybe my rabbi is not going to be as understanding with regard to these things, but when I told him about it, he was really amazing. And so the whole point is that really people, I think in very many ways, if they are informed and you give them a chance to actually listen and understand, then they will be really able to understand. And that in turn will make the experience so much more rewarding for yourself.
Yeah, Alex, I'm so glad you brought that up because I think we talk about these conversations and how challenging they are, and yet they're so important and they are so rewarding. And you're really seeing this here tonight with folks like Alex and Val who are so incredibly brave. And one of the things that you also brought up and that Val brought up too is not only this sometimes disconnect that we feel between clinicians and faith leaders, that we really can bridge this gap, these conversations can happen, but also across faith traditions. And as we get into later versions of this live stream, we're gonna talk a little more about something Val mentioned, which is that even within faith traditions, religious scrup can manifest in very, very different ways. And it's still OCD, but just based on how you're living out that tradition. So I've shared, I work as an interfaith chaplain. I work with folks who are Jewish and Christian and Muslim and Buddhist and Sikh. And I end up seeing folks with religious group that it looks totally different if they are a Sunni or a Shia Muslim, or it looks completely different if you are an Orthodox or a Reform Jew, or it looks totally different if you are Catholic or if you're UCC or if you're Episcopalian. I mean, there's all of these different ways, even just in the Christian tradition, if you're mainline or if you're evangelical Protestant, it flows out in these different ways. And I think being able to engage these faith leaders is so important, because the treatment for every Christian and for every Jew and for every Muslim is going to look different. And these are really important nuances that we want to get across as a part of this conversation.
Yeah, and something I would add is that even if you are like Jewish, you could potentially think about certain Christian ideas and have obsessions about them. And if, let's say, you're atheist, you still may have religious obsessions. So it's really an individual thing in many respects.
And if I may, when it comes to kind of, especially Alex, what you were saying, kind of reaching out to your faith leader, you are not actually just doing that for you. You are not doing that just for you, the person that is struggling with scrupulosity. You are also doing it for the other people that haven't yet spoken up, right? Because by speaking up to this person, right, who can offer you support, but it can also open their eyes to what they might see in other people to recognize their suffering, right? Mm-hmm. These things, like these disorders, this distress, like it thrives in darkness. And when we let the light in, when we can open it up, when we can start to open up about our experience, not only can we get the support that we need, we can be a beacon of light for other people that need it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think once we start seeing it as a illness, that relieves so much tension, I think, in some of the church bodies, because so often I think people or pastors or people of faith are so afraid that we're outsourcing, God or Jesus, I say all the time. And it has nothing to do with that. Even with me advocating, I'm not out here trying to change anybody's opinion, on what faith they're practicing. That I haven't been called to do that. That's not my job. Mine is to basically share my experience, encourage people that there's hope. Now, my perspective will be from a Christian perspective, but I think once we kind of are able to leave that faith part out of it and just look at us as people that need medical attention or whatever, that helps so much too. Because we're so afraid of, like, say, the term mental illness. There's so much conviction in that, because from my experience, people just see it as a head thing. It's not a medical diagnosis.
Yeah.
But it is.
Yeah. As long as you conflate. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to say, understanding is something that's universal. It doesn't have to be in one faith. Understanding is something everyone of every faith can have.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's, to Val's point, it can be really scary to have these conversations within faith communities. And sometimes there's this view of, I should have just prayed harder. I should have just engaged in my religious ritual better, and I wouldn't be experiencing this thing. And I tell clients all the time, maybe this evidence-based treatment is your answer to prayer. We can really look at it in that way too, that we have this amazing, awesome treatment that works, and based on your faith tradition that you can even see as this gift from God or this gift from the divine, that you can live into and do this in a really, really awesome way to get back to your faith in a value-driven way. So I want to get to, I know we're kind of running low on time. We're having this awesome conversation. So I'm like trying to figure out, okay, questions in the chat, but I do want to ask y'all along these lines. And Caitlin brought this up beforehand, in thinking about what it means to get back to your faith in a value-driven way, which for folks listening, by the way, is what we're trying to do. And having folks do exposures, it's not trying to get you to oppose your faith tradition. It's literally helping you get back to your faith in a way that's meaningful. It's opposing the OCD. That's what it's doing. But does that mean, Caitlin, that you have to have a therapist that is your same faith tradition?
Absolutely not. The most important thing is that you have a therapist that knows how to treat OCD. And in terms of integrating your faith tradition, again, this is where the collaboration is so important, right? Because I, as a clinician, do not know everything about, the person's faith in front of me. I, as a clinician, don't know everything about, the person's developmental history in front of me. I don't know everything about what their spouse is like, right? So there's a lot of ways in which my information or kind of what I use for my treatment comes from collaboration, both with my client and with the other people that are important to them in their life. Right? So the first and foremost in terms of an effective provider is one that knows how to treat OCD and knows how to treat it well. B, someone that is willing to collaborate with the people in your life that are important to you from a faith perspective. Okay. And there was a C, I forget what it is right now, but it was super important too.
Well, I think that's a great transition because maybe your important point. Go ahead, Caitlin, it's here.
Yes, sorry. And also a clinician that will not impose what they think is appropriate versus where that being collaboratively agreed upon between the clinician's expertise and the faith leader's expertise, right? So again, with that example of, pushing a Ouija board on you, you want a clinician that knows what they're doing in terms of treatment and one that is open to collaboration.
Yeah, and to add and also build on what I think Katie was saying, I think that the therapy I have had has helped me to be more connected to God and more connected to my faith. And I love what you were saying, Dr. Woods, about how, the question is, why do bad things happen to good people? No one deserves to have OCD. At the same time, this is an opportunity for us to really make the most out of our lives in some respects. Like in some respects, because we have this illness, we actually have an opportunity to change people's minds and to improve the world. So I'm not saying that this is a solution. I'm not saying this justifies any of it, but it's really an amazing way to think about it, I think, to really realize, this is a challenge, but as with any challenge, it is an opportunity to grow as a people. And if we did not have challenges, we wouldn't be able to grow as people. And so doing ERP, doing all these things, not only does it help us get better, but it helps us to better the world and to be better people.
Yeah. Alex, I wish that we had like all kinds of emojis on StreamYard because I want to put up giant hearts for everything that you just said because it really is true. And I think for folks listening here from a lot of different faith traditions, most faith traditions believe that God doesn't necessarily create the brokenness in our lives, but the divine can offer us opportunities to create beauty out of that brokenness. And I think that's an opportunity that we have with our treatment and with advocacy and with OCD and with this awesome work. I do want to ask at least one question on here that pertains to what we're talking about. And that question is at 739 from Eric. And I think it's a good one because it's a little bit different from the script piece we've talked about so far. So at 739, Eric says, my scrupulosity can take many forms, not just religious observances, but thoughts that I'm not fulfilling my destiny or doing what I'm supposed to do with my life. Do you have any thoughts about that? So free for all. I know we don't have that much time. So anybody who wants to jump on that.
Yes, definitely. Okay. So one thing real quick, I almost said this earlier. Existential obsessions, also referred to as philosophical obsessions, which at least without any more information, it sounds like this touches on, often cross over. And even disgust-based contamination obsessions can cross over into religious obsessions in so many ways for all sorts of different traditions. And so, first of all, there can be a crossover between that as well. But the fulfilling one's destiny, even if it's just in a general sense or more in an overt spiritual meaning, meaning of the universe, God, purpose sense. First of all, it's remarkably common that comes up. And I just want to be really, really clear, because even to this day, there's still confusion. I've talked to clients who said, yeah, like I talked to a therapist or a psychiatrist who said that, well, you can do ERP for behaviors, you just can't really do it with thoughts. No. What we do is we start identifying, actually the easier way is to identify compulsions if you know it, but we start to identify where those problems are coming up. Where does it look different? Not just from other people that you respect, because hey, let's face it, you might actually want to be more detailed in your thought. I've worked with a ton of theology, philosophy students, seminary students, et cetera, that want to think deeper. They want to be more intentional. They want to be more detailed, but we can still separate out what is the compulsion, what is the obsessive process, and where is it creating impairments? And that's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Something I want to add as someone with OCD is I used to think I only have one type of OCD. And throughout the years, I've had so many of the other types of OCD, like contamination, intrusive thoughts, religious, organization. I've had like everything at one point or another, pretty much, it feels like. So everything is equally valid and equally important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think so often to this point, we sometimes get into this place where we're like, okay, I have this category and you have this category. And what we come back to a lot with the Faith and OCD task force is OCD is OCD is OCD. And it takes on different forms. It's latching onto the things that are the most significant to you, whether that's your personal faith tradition or any other value that's meaningful in your life. But the treatment remains the same. It's just OCD up to its old tricks, getting you to pay attention with its new like, nah, like come look at me, of whatever it's doing on that particular day. I love this question here that actually pertains to what Alex was talking about. So it says, Nikki at 751, I've noticed a lot of Jewish people have OCD. Any thoughts on why that might be? And actually, rather than go with that, I want to jump actually just to Alex. And what are some of the obsessions and compulsions that you've navigated or that you've seen folks in your community navigate? So I want to pivot that question a little bit, because I think sometimes it's easy for us to say like, oh, folks in the Jewish tradition have a lot of OCD, or folks in the Christian tradition. And I think it's folks in every faith community have OCD, because there are individuals that have OCD that happen to be a part of faith communities. Go ahead, Caitlin, and then I'll go.
We have the research, and
yes,
OCD is an equal opportunity love across all of the faith traditions. It's like, as people have asked that question, it's like, well, there's got to be a faith where you've got more scrupulosity. Turns out no, and we have the research for that.
It's kind of the psychological thing is, I think if it's us, we tend to look at people from our own community, and so we see more our own community in many respects. But I think that OCD, of course, it's something about brain chemicals. It's not really necessarily something that is like what is based on one's personal actions, but it's caused by things that are not able to be controlled, usually, pretty much. And but the OCD itself can be controlled. And so I've had compulsions with regard to a lot of things. So one thing that I've had is, of course, whether or not I actually believe in God. And it's like, I don't feel like I believe, but the thing is, I always feel this feeling of uncertainty. Another thing I've had is I've been worried about, whether I'm doing certain rituals such as prayers properly, whether I'm having the right concentration, whether I am reading the words as well as I can, whether I'm doing certain customs as well as I can, just a lot of things in general. And what I've really focused on has been finding areas where I'm not really like breaking my faith. Like it would not be fair for me to like do something where I would, break the Sabbath, because I strictly observe the Sabbath. But what I can do is I can do things where, it's a little bit of a case where it's not exactly really like a fundamental aspect. And I often will err on the side of challenging OCD. So in a lot of circumstances, there's a case where you know what, the important thing is really to focus on my health. I can't be looking at every single thing and being like, and having OCD compulsions about, well, is this actually a part of my religion? Because a lot of the times when I have those compulsions, it's specifically because, no, it's not a fundamental aspect of my religion. It's something that my mind is tricking me into believing is. And I think that it is definitely possible to notice the difference. Whenever I have questions, whenever it's too difficult for me to understand, I'll often ask my therapist or my rabbi for help. And that's what's so great about having help, is you don't have to come up with all the answers on your own. But I do think that as someone with OCD, I can kind of get a feel for when it's OCD and when it's not OCD, at least especially with practice and with therapy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Alex. I'm mindful we just had a couple of new great questions come in, and I'm going to give in a second kind of let you know how we're going to continue some of these conversations specific to different faith traditions as well, because I think this is an important piece. But I'm mindful of time, and actually just want to give everybody a minute, or maybe I was going to say a minute or two, but a minute because of time, just to anything that you would like to kind of close out by letting folks know about faith and OCD. Do you have any final thoughts? And Caitlin.
Final thoughts about faith and OCD?
Yeah, to leave folks with tonight. Yeah.
There are answers that we are not supposed to know, or that we do not have the privilege of knowing, right? Many of which are in faith, but the trap happens when we try to come to the answer to a question that is not within our realm of the ability to know the answer to. And so particularly, I think back to that question that we looked at before, it's like, am I living my destiny? What I encourage everyone to try is learn through experience. Try things, see what happens, see what it's like when you do, rather than try to figure out first.
Thank you, Caitlin. And you just got a lot of love in the chat for that. So thank you. Thank you so much. Alex, any final thoughts?
Yeah. I think, to quote Ethics of the Fathers from Judaism Pirkei Avot, according to the effort is the reward. And sometimes we feel like, you know what, I have this challenge that's more than other people. I'm not doing as well as other people. Really, it's about taking the hand you've been dealt and doing the best that we can with it. And at the end of the day, if we are trying our best, I think that's what ultimately is the most important judgment of merit. And so don't feel frustrated and stay hopeful. I think hope is a very important thing in my religion. In fact, it's one of the most essential parts of Judaism, and I think of many faith traditions. Hope, even in the most darkest times, because it can always get better. And I always like to say the quote, life does get better. That's a quote. That's like a tagline I've always liked to say.
It does. Thank you so much, Alex. Final thoughts, Val?
Well, I was sitting here thinking, that's a pretty good question. And it's an important question too. I think for me, it starts with being informed, but from a personal point of view, and as a Christian, I want to be known by my love. I want to be known by being open to other people's perspectives, listening without judgment, or listening without thinking what I'm going to come back and say, to really be in the presence, and to be present when we're doing these kind of topics that I don't want to be seen as threatening. Like you say, it should be a safe place. And I think all of that comes with learning. Going back to the last conversation, I remember when I was sitting in the pews and I didn't have any idea what was going on. I just thought I was a bad, horrible person that was having all these thoughts that I've never shared in my life with people, except for one person, because I was so convicted that that I was the only one. So once once I was able to get information and to spread that kind of information, it just made my life so much easier. But bottom line, it's a simple saying, we should be known by our love. And that's it. And there is hope that this too shall pass. It always does. Sometimes it takes a while. Yeah.
Thank you.
And we're not perfect. We're not perfect saints. None of us chose to what cross we were to bear. That was given to us. So, just stay encouraged.
Thank you so much, Val. And then final thoughts, Justin.
Yeah, absolutely. There is hope. I think that the greatest confusion that I see, and there's a lot of tripping points, but the greatest confusion that I see is seeing OCD as a faith problem specifically. But OCD is not a faith problem per se. Like, of course, it's going to touch on faith. Of course, you're going to want to think through it, faith issues and spirituality, etc. But we're doing triage care in many ways. And if the alcoholic gets serious about getting better and they want to make all sorts of decisions for life, the first thing that we're going to say is you need to be sober, to have a clear head. And one of the things that people want, of course, naturally, is to have a clear head, clear thinking, clear practice when it comes to faith concerns certainty as well. But even not related to the doubt and certainty conversation, even just related to that desire to be a part, the desire to be a little bit more like peers or whatever. Well, we can't do that until we do the work first that clears up that wreckage on the road, or it clears up the brain. And that's what we're about with this. They're not mutually exclusive. They're also not mutually inclusive. We can do both. We can do it well. And that's what I got for tonight.
I think that's an awesome place to close. And before I do some wrap ups, so stay on. We have like 2 minutes of wrap ups here and reminders of places that y'all can get involved. So don't jump off quite yet. But just wanted to note too that this is such an inspiring group of folks. And I think it's so amazing. And I hope folks here recognize how neat it is to really see clinicians and faith leaders and individuals with OCD having these conversations, but to also see that this is something that is completely possible, and that we, with your help, can do this on a much larger scale. I saw so many folks tonight advocating the chat. I saw some great suggestions of Henry Nouwen. So that's some fantastic things going on. But I hope you all want to continue to have these conversations. And no matter where you are right now with sharing your story or engaging, what you're doing makes a difference. And I think back often, even 3 years ago, as a faith leader, where I was so private. I didn't want anybody to know that I had OCD. I remember going to one of the conferences and putting the sticker on my name tag so they couldn't take any pictures of me. I want nobody to know. I don't want people to see me in a particular way as a faith leader. And after a relapse, became much more public and started to say, wait, no, people do need to know that faith leaders struggle, that folks with faith struggle, and that there is no shame around having these conversations in religious spaces. And even as a faith leader, I was so surprised by the positive response of the communities that I served and of the wider area, where it wasn't, oh, you're inadequate to serve now. It was hearing from person after person after person saying, oh, wait, Chaplain K, actually, I have this mental health struggle, and now I feel like I can talk to you because you're somebody in a faith tradition who gets it and can have this conversation. And I guarantee for those of you who are willing to be a part of this dialogue, that those are the responses that you're going to get to. And yes, it's challenging. Yes, it's hard. I know Val highlighted there are spaces where there's some push and some pull, but I think there is so much hope for this dialogue, and you can make such a difference. So as we close out tonight, I'm going to have
one thing, Katie.
Yeah.
One thing I want to say, make sure, because you never give yourself enough credit. Thank you publicly, get your flowers now, for all the work that you're doing. Yeah. And for all of us who have learned to put our egos aside and get the work done, I just love you and applaud you for what you're doing, so everybody can know.
I love you. I love you too, Val. And I will say, vocationally and professionally, in doing stuff with faith and OCD, I wouldn't be doing this without the group here and without the IOCDF, and I would never have had the confidence to be willing to share my story without folks like you sharing your story first. So thank you. It's a big honor. So I love, yes, all the things. I want to hug everyone. So in closing out tonight, I'd love to have Fran behind the scenes go ahead and put up or put in the chat our special link for our Faith and OCD special interest group. And if you're listening tonight and you're saying, "Ooh, I want to be a part of these conversations. I want to get involved in advocacy," whether you're a clinician, a faith leader, an individual with OCD, join us. We have actually our next meeting next Monday. You can sign up here at this link. We'll be there next Monday at 7 p.m. I host that group. I know that Alex and Val will be there. All are welcome. We chat together. We spend time together. We share stories. It's great fun. So please, please, please join us. Another few reminders is just that this live stream is one of many. You can view the entire live stream schedule and submit topics and questions for future live streams at iocdf.org/peaceofmind. You can watch live or view recordings on IOCDF's YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn pages, as well as iocdf.org/live. And just as a note, tomorrow from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we have our Ask the Experts live stream with IOCDF advocates Liz McInvale and Chris Tronston. Liz and Chris are awesome clinicians who have experienced their own journey with OCD. Yes, Val's clapping. We love them dearly. So tune in live to ask questions. And just one more note. For if there are any researchers who are listening tonight, I know I saw some professionals in the chat. The IOCDF is offering research grants to scientists who are investigating OCD and related disorders. More than $1.5 million in research funding is available in 2022. Proposals are currently being accepted, so be sure to submit yours by February 28th at iocdf.org/research. So in closing, please remember to like and subscribe to get notified when live streams are scheduled. If we didn't get to your question, because I know we are having such awesome dialogue here, or if you have a suggestion for a future topic you'd like to see covered on this or on any of our streams, please go to iocdf.org/peaceofmind to submit these. We already have some plans to talk about things like faith and values, what is healthy faith versus OCD, separating faith from OCD, but we'd love to hear the other things that you would like as a part of this stream. And if you're in need of resources, please visit iocdf.org. You can always reach out, and we are always, always, always here to support you on the journey. So thank you all for being with us tonight, and we will see you next time.
High five, guys.
Oh.
Awesome.